The rain had been falling since morning. Not hard, just steady. The kind that soaks your shoes before you even notice. Downtown Los Angeles smelled like wet concrete and bus exhaust. People hurried under umbrellas or hunched into their jackets, eyes down, minds already at their next stop, their next worry. Near the corner of 7th and Grand, an elderly woman stood waiting at the bus stop. She wore a faded floral coat, 2 sizes too big, and gripped a grocery bag with one hand while leaning heavily on a wooden cane with the other. Her silver hair was tucked under a knitted cap, and her eyes, soft, tired, but still sharp, watched the street for the number 20 bus. Her fingers trembled slightly from the cold, or maybe from something deeper, something that had been building for weeks. Behind her, a man in his early 40s approached, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. He carried a backpack slung over one shoulder and held a phone in his hand, thumb scrolling fast. He didn't look at her. Not really. When the bus finally pulled up with a hiss of brakes and a cloud of steam from the wet pavement, he stepped forward quickly as if trying to get on before she could slow him down. "Come on, Ma," he muttered, not turning around. "You're gonna miss it." She shuffled faster, her cane tapping unevenly on the wet sidewalk. One step, another, her breath came in short puffs. By the time she reached the bus steps, the driver was already waiting, holding the door open with a patient frown. "Take your time, ma'am," he said gently. But her son was already halfway down the aisle, dropping into a seat near the middle without looking back. She climbed on slowly, gripping the handrail with both hands now, the grocery bag swinging awkwardly from her wrist. A few passengers glanced her way, some with sympathy, others with the quiet impatience city life teaches you to wear like armor. She found the seat across from her son and lowered herself carefully, wincing just a little. The bus rumbled back into motion, swaying gently as it merged into traffic. Rain streaked the windows, turning the outside world into smudges of gray and neon. For a moment there was silence, just the hum of the engine, the soft squeak of wet shoes, the occasional cough. Then her son exhaled sharply, loud enough to cut through the noise. "Honestly," he said, voice low but sharp, "why do you even go out in this weather? You know you can barely walk, and now I've got to come get you like I'm your chauffeur." She didn't answer right away. She just stared at her hands, folded in her lap over the grocery bag. Inside it were a few things: a small bag of rice, a carton of eggs, a box of her favorite green tea. Simple things. Things she'd wanted to get herself because she still could, even if it took longer now. "I didn't ask you to come," she said quietly. "Oh, right," he snapped, turning to face her. "Because standing in the rain for an hour is such a great idea. What if you fell? Who's going to pick you up then? The pigeons?" A woman 2 rows ahead shifted in her seat. An older man near the back lowered his newspaper just enough to peek over the top. No one said anything, but the air felt heavier. The elderly woman kept her eyes down. "I just wanted to get a few things," she whispered. "I didn't want to be a bother." "A bother?" He let out a dry laugh. "You think this is about being a bother? It's about you not listening. You forget your keys, you leave the stove on. You wander off in the store like you don't even know where you are. And then I get the call from the manager, again asking if I can come get you. Like I don't have a job. Like I don't have bills." His voice rose slightly with each sentence, not shouting but edged with a frustration that had clearly been simmering for a long time. The kind of frustration that comes not just from the moment but from months, maybe years of feeling stretched too thin, too tired, too alone. She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly as if agreeing with him, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the grocery bag. "I'm sorry," she said again, so softly it was almost lost under the bus's rumble. But her son wasn't done. "You say that every time." "I'm sorry, but nothing changes. You keep doing the same things and I keep cleaning up the mess. I love you, Ma, but sometimes I just wish you'd let me help before it turns into a crisis." The words hung there, raw and honest, but spoken without kindness. They landed like stones. In the back of the bus, a man who'd been reading a paperback looked up. He was dressed simply, dark jeans, a gray hoodie, a worn-out backpack at his feet. He hadn't been paying much attention at first, just riding home after a long day, lost in his book. But something in the son's voice, the mix of anger and exhaustion, made him pause. And then he saw the woman, the way she sat so small in her seat, how she kept her eyes lowered like she was trying to disappear. He'd seen that look before, on his own mother's face years ago during harder times. He marked his page with a finger and closed the book slowly. Up front, the son rubbed his temples, muttering something under his breath about being late for work. The woman reached into her bag, pulled out a tissue, and dabbed the corner of her eye quickly, as if embarrassed to be seen crying. Outside, the rain kept falling. The bus turned onto Wilshire, passing coffee shops and laundromats, people rushing in and out of doorways, lives unfolding in fragments behind glass. Then, from the back, a calm voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me." Everyone turned slightly. Even the son looked up, surprised. The man in the hoodie stood. He wasn't tall, but there was something steady about him. The way he moved, the way he held himself. He walked down the aisle slowly, not in a hurry, not making a show of it. Just walking. He stopped beside the elderly woman's seat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and kind. "Would you mind if I sat with you for a bit?" She looked up, startled. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she managed a small nod. He smiled gently. "Thank you." Without another word, he helped her shift her grocery bag to the floor, then carefully took the seat beside her. He didn't look at her son, didn't glare or scold. He just sat there, calm and present, like he belonged. The son stared at him for a second, confused, maybe a little defensive. But the man didn't engage. He just turned to the woman and asked, "How's your day going so far?" She blinked as if no one had asked her that in a long time. Then slowly a tiny smile touched her lips. "It's been a day," she said. He nodded like he understood completely. Yeah, those days. And just like that, the heavy air in the bus began to lift, not all at once, but enough. Enough for the woman to sit a little straighter. Enough for her son to look away, his anger fading into something quieter, something that looked a lot like shame. The rain kept falling outside. But inside the bus, something had shifted. Something small but real, and it had only just begun. The bus rolled on, tires hissing over wet pavement, windshield wipers keeping time like a slow metronome. Inside, the air had changed. Not dramatically, but enough that people noticed. The tension that had coiled tight around the elderly woman and her son had loosened. Just a little, thanks to the quiet man who'd sat beside her. He didn't say much at first, just leaned back, hands resting on his knees, and let the silence settle like dust after a storm. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind that gives people room to breathe. After a few blocks, he turned to her. "You like green tea?" he asked, nodding toward the grocery bag at her feet. She looked surprised, then glanced down as if she'd forgotten what was in it. "Yes," she said, voice still soft but steadier now. "Jasmine green. It's the only kind that doesn't taste bitter to me." He smiled. "My mom used to drink that too, said it reminded her of spring mornings back home." She nodded slowly. "It's comforting, like a warm blanket for your insides." They talked like that, easy, unhurried. About tea, about the rain, about how the bus always smells like old socks and coffee no matter the season. He asked about her garden and her eyes lit up just a little. "I've got a few pots on the balcony," she said. "Orchids mostly. They're fussy, but they bloom if you talk to them." "Talk to them?" he asked, raising an eyebrow playfully. "Oh yes," she said, a real smile breaking through. "They like to be told they're doing a good job." He chuckled softly. "I'll have to try that with my cactus, though I'm pretty sure it's plotting against me." A few people nearby smiled. Even the bus driver glanced in the rearview mirror and gave a small nod. From across the aisle, her son watched. At first, his arms were crossed, his expression closed off, part embarrassment, part defensiveness. But as the conversation continued, something in his posture shifted. His shoulders dropped, his hands unclenched. He wasn't used to seeing his mother like this, lighter, almost playful. It had been months, maybe longer, since he'd heard her laugh even a little. The man didn't ignore him. He didn't scold or lecture, but after a while he turned slightly in his seat and said, "You look tired?" It wasn't an accusation, just an observation, quiet, human. The son blinked. No one had said that to him in a long time, not with concern anyway. Most people just expected him to keep going, keep handling things, keep being the strong one. "I am," he admitted, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "Work's been crazy and, well, you saw how it is," the man nodded. "It's hard, isn't it? Caring for someone you love when you're running on empty." The son looked down at his hands. Yeah. And I don't even know if I'm doing it right. She forgets things. Sometimes she gets confused. I yell, and then I hate myself after. You're not alone, the man said simply. Most people don't know what they're doing. We just do our best and hope it's enough. They rode in silence for a moment, the bus turning onto a quieter street lined with old brick buildings and flickering streetlights. Then the man added, I lost my mom a while back, and my sister too. His voice didn't waver, but there was a weight behind the words, like he was carrying something he'd learned to live with. There were days I was short with them, days I was too busy to really listen, and now I'd give anything to sit with them on a bus like this, even if it was raining, even if we were arguing about groceries. The son swallowed hard. He didn't know what to say. No grand speech came to mind, just a lump in his throat and a sudden sharp awareness of how fragile time really is. The elderly woman reached over and gently touched the man's arm. I'm sorry, she said. He covered her hand with his for just a second. Thank you. But don't be sorry for me. Be kind to each other while you still can. That's the only thing that really matters in the end. Up ahead, the bus slowed for a red light. Raindrops slid down the windows like slow tears. The son looked at his mother, really looked. Not at her forgetfulness, not at the inconvenience, but at her. At the woman who'd stayed up with him when he had fevers as a kid, who'd packed his lunches with little notes tucked inside, who'd worked double shifts just to keep the lights on. She was still there, just older, slower, more tired. And he'd been so focused on what she couldn't do anymore that he'd forgotten to see what she still was. I'm sorry, Ma, he said suddenly, his voice rough. I didn't mean... I just get so frustrated, she turned to him, eyes glistening. I know, sweetheart. I get frustrated too, when I can't remember where I put my glasses or when my legs don't listen. But I never stop loving you. Not for a second. He reached across the aisle and took her hand. It felt small in his, but warm. Real. The man watched them, then looked out the window as if giving them space. He didn't need to say more. He'd already said enough. A few stops later, a young woman with bright red headphones stood up and offered the elderly woman her seat near the front, closer to the door, easier to get off. The woman hesitated, but the man gave her a gentle nudge. Go on. You've earned a better seat. She smiled and shuffled forward, her son helping her up. As she passed, she turned back and said, Thank you. He just nodded. Take care of each other. The bus filled with a quiet hum again. Less heavy now, more like the sound of people remembering they're not alone. Someone offered the son a pack of tissues. Another passenger asked the elderly woman about her orchids. Small kindnesses passing like ripples in water. And in the back, the man opened his book again, but he didn't read. He just held it in his lap, watching the city blur by through the rain-streaked glass. He knew he wouldn't stay on much longer. His stop was coming up soon, but before he left, he wanted to make sure they were okay, not fixed, not perfect, but pointed in the right direction. Because sometimes all it takes is one moment of real connection to remind people what they've forgotten. As the bus pulled up to the next stop, he stood, slung his backpack over one shoulder, and walked down the aisle. When he passed the son, he paused for just a second. You're doing better than you think, he said quietly. The son looked up, surprised. Thanks, he managed. The man gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then stepped off the bus into the rain. No one took a picture. No one shouted his name. To most, he was just another stranger getting off at his stop. But to two people on that bus, he'd been something else entirely. The doors closed behind him. The bus moved on. Inside, the son squeezed his mother's hand again. When we get home, he said, tell me about those orchids and maybe we can have some of that green tea together. She smiled, the kind of smile that comes from relief, from hope. I'd like that. Outside, the rain began to ease. Not stopping, just softening like the world itself was exhaling. And somewhere down the street, a quiet man in a hoodie walked away, hands in his pockets, disappearing into the gray afternoon like he'd never been there at all. But he had. And because of that, everything had changed. The bus rolled forward again, the rain now just a soft mist clinging to the windows. Inside, the air felt different. Not fixed, not perfect, but softer, like a knot had been loosened just enough to let someone breathe. The son kept hold of his mother's hand, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles as if trying to memorize the feeling. She sat a little taller now, her shoulders relaxed, her eyes no longer fixed on the floor but watching the passing streets with quiet curiosity. A few stops later, the bus slowed near a small park where wet benches glistened under streetlights. That's when the son spoke again, his voice lower this time, almost shy. "Ma, about what I said earlier, I didn't mean it like that." She turned to him, not with anger or hurt, but with the kind of patience that only comes from loving someone through decades of mistakes. "I know you didn't mean to be cruel," she said, "but words still sting even when they come from someone you love." He nodded, staring at their joined hands. I feel like I'm failing you. Like no matter what I do, it's never enough. You forget your medicine. You leave the stove on. I get called at work and my boss is getting tired of it. And then I come home exhausted and you're upset because I didn't call to say I'd be late. And I snap. And then I hate myself." His voice cracked on the last word. He didn't cry, not yet, but his eyes were bright with the kind of tired that goes deeper than sleep. She didn't offer empty comfort. She didn't say, "It's okay," because it wasn't, but she did say something truer. "I'm scared too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wake up sometimes and don't know what day it is. I look in the mirror and don't recognize the face staring back. I don't want to be a burden, but I also don't want to be alone." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw not just the woman who needed help, but the woman who was still fighting, still trying, still showing up even when her body and mind betrayed her. "You're not a burden," he said firmly. "You're my mom." She gave a small, shaky laugh. "Even when I burn the toast?" "Especially when you burn the toast," he said. And for the first time in weeks, they both smiled. Real, unguarded smiles that reached their eyes. A few rows ahead, an older woman wiped her own eyes with the back of her hand. A teenager with earbuds halfway out glanced over, then pulled them off completely, as if suddenly remembering that real life was happening right here, right now. The bus turned onto a quieter street lined with apartment buildings and corner stores. The son took a deep breath. Maybe we need help. Real help, not just me trying to do everything alone." She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly. "There's a program at the community center. They have people who come by twice a week to check in, help with groceries, even just sit and talk. Mrs. Lynn next door goes. She says it's nice to have someone to play cards with." "I didn't know that," he said. "You never asked," she replied gently. "You've been so busy carrying everything yourself, you forgot to ask what I actually need." He winced. "Yeah, I guess I did." They rode in silence for a few more blocks, but it wasn't the heavy silence from before. This one was full of unspoken promises, of trying harder, of listening more, of not letting pride or exhaustion get in the way of love. Then, as if on cue, the bus driver announced their stop over the speaker. Next stop, Oakwood Avenue. The son stood helping his mother to her feet. He picked up her grocery bag, slung his own backpack over his shoulder, and waited as she carefully stepped into the aisle. As they moved toward the front, the young woman who'd offered her seat earlier gave them a small, encouraging smile. The bus driver even held the door a second longer than usual. Outside, the rain had nearly stopped. Puddles shimmered under the streetlights, and the air smelled fresh, like the city had been rinsed clean. They stepped onto the sidewalk, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The son looked back at the bus as it pulled away, its red taillights fading into the mist. "He didn't even tell us his name," he said quietly. "Maybe he didn't need to," his mother replied. "Some people are just passing kindness along." They began walking slowly toward their building, her cane tapping softly on the wet concrete. Halfway down the block, he stopped. "Wait here a sec," he said. He hurried to a small corner store they passed every day but rarely entered. A minute later, he came out holding 2 paper cups of hot tea. Jasmine green, just like the kind in her grocery bag. She raised an eyebrow. "You remembered?" "I've been listening," he said, handing her a cup. "More than I realized." They stood there on the sidewalk, sipping their tea in the cool evening air, steam curling around their faces. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wouldn't solve everything. But it was a start. Back on the bus, life went on. People got off, others got on. The driver made his rounds, the wipers kept swishing, the city kept breathing. But something had shifted. Not just for the mother and son, but for everyone who'd witnessed it. Because kindness, when it's real, doesn't just help the person receiving it. It reminds everyone nearby that they're part of something bigger, that were all just trying, failing, and trying again. Later that night after they got home, the son helped his mother into her favorite chair. He put the kettle on, found her slippers, and set out her medicine in little cups like she liked. Then he sat on the floor beside her, leaning his head back against her knee like he used to do as a boy. "Tell me about the orchids again," he said, and she did. She told him how one had bloomed bright purple last spring, how another refused to flower no matter what she did, how she talked to them every morning like they were old friends. He listened, really listened, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And in that small apartment with the rain still whispering against the windows, something quiet and powerful began to grow. Not an orchid, not a solution, but something even more rare: understanding. Meanwhile, miles away, the man in the hoodie walked into a quiet apartment, dropped his backpack by the door, and stood for a moment in the dim light. He didn't think about what he'd done. He didn't expect thanks or recognition. He just made himself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the city lights blink on one by one. He knew he couldn't fix the world, but he could be kind in the moment he was given, and sometimes that was enough to change everything. The next morning, the son called the community center. He asked about the senior program, about respite care, about support groups for family caregivers. The woman on the phone sounded surprised. Most people only called when things had already fallen apart. "We'll send you the information," she said warmly, "and thank you for reaching out." That afternoon, he helped his mother water her orchids. One of them, stubborn, silent for months, had a tiny green bud at its base. "Look," she whispered, pointing. "It's trying," he smiled. "Yeah," he said. "So are we." The days after the bus ride didn't magically fix everything. There were still mornings when the coffee pot was left on, afternoons when the same question was asked 3 times in 10 minutes, and nights when exhaustion made patience thin. But something had changed, not in the problems themselves, but in how they were faced. The son started small. He bought a whiteboard and hung it by the front door. On it, he wrote the day of the week, the date, and a simple note: "You are loved." Every morning he updated it. Sometimes his mother would stand in front of it for a full minute, reading it like it was a letter from an old friend. He also called the community center like he'd promised. A woman named Diane came by the following Tuesday, warm, no nonsense, with kind eyes and a laugh that filled the room. She didn't treat his mother like a patient. She asked about her orchids. She remembered her favorite tea. And when she left, she gave the son a pamphlet for a local support group for family caregivers. "You don't have to do this alone," she'd said, handing it to him like it was a lifeline, which in a way it was. That weekend, he went to his first meeting. He sat in the back at first, arms crossed, unsure if he belonged. But then a man with tired eyes talked about forgetting his own birthday because he'd been up all night with his father, who'd wandered out of the house in his slippers. Another woman shared how she cried in the grocery store because she couldn't decide between low-sodium soup and the kind her mom actually liked. No one judged. No one offered easy answers. They just listened. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a failure. He just felt human. Back at home, things shifted slowly. He stopped rushing her in the mornings. Instead of snapping when she asked the same question twice, he answered it like it was the first time. And sometimes when she got confused, he'd gently take her hand and say, "It's okay. We'll figure it out together." One evening, while sorting laundry, she found an old photo tucked in a sweater pocket, black and white, faded at the edges. It showed a much younger version of herself, holding a little boy on her shoulders, both of them laughing under a tree. "Is that you?" he asked, drying his hands on a towel. She nodded, tracing the boy's face with her finger. "You were 5. We went to the park every Sunday. You used to call the ducks your feather friends." He laughed. "I don't remember that." "You were brave," she said softly. "Even when you fell off the swing, you'd get right back on. You always said, 'I got this, Ma.'" He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just the woman who needed help, but the woman who had raised him to be strong, even when life knocked him down. "I still got this, Ma," he said quietly. We both do. Meanwhile, life in the city moved on. People rushed to work, argued on phones, hurried past each other without a glance. But sometimes, in quiet moments, someone would remember that rainy bus ride. The young woman with red headphones told her roommate about it over dinner. The bus driver mentioned it to his wife, who worked at a senior home. Even the teenager who'd pulled out his earbuds started volunteering at a local center on weekends, just to sit and talk with folks who didn't get many visitors. Kindness once planted has a way of spreading, quietly, steadily, like roots under pavement. Then, one afternoon about 3 weeks after the bus ride, the son was walking home from the pharmacy when he passed a small bookstore. In the window, propped against a stack of novels, was a handwritten sign, "Be kind. Time's precious." He stopped. His breath caught. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. He stepped inside. The shop was cozy, shelves crammed with books, the smell of old paper and coffee in the air. Behind the counter stood the same man, from the bus, hoodie gone, now in a plain t-shirt and jeans, restocking a shelf of poetry. Their eyes met. No surprise, no fanfare, just a quiet recognition. "You made it," the man said simply. "I did," the son replied. "Thanks to you." The man shook his head. "Nah. You did the work. I just reminded you that you could." He walked over, holding a small paper bag. "Here, for your mom." Inside was a single orchid, not blooming yet, but healthy, with strong green leaves and a promise of color to come. She mentioned hers like they were friends, the man said with a small smile. Thought she might like a new one to talk to. The son's throat tightened. "She'll love it." They stood there for a moment, not saying much. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. "You know," the man said after a while, "most people think kindness is about big gestures, saving someone, fixing everything, but it's not. It's about showing up, listening, remembering someone's favorite tea." The son nodded. "I'm learning that." "Good," the man said. "Because the world needs more people who show up, even when it's hard." Before he left, the son asked, Can I thank you properly, at least know your name?" The man paused, then smiled. Not the kind for cameras, but the kind that comes from a place of peace. "Names don't matter as much as what you do with your time, but if it helps, just call me a friend." And with that, he turned back to his books, humming softly under his breath. The son walked home with the orchid cradled in his arms like something sacred. When he got to the apartment, his mother was sitting by the window, talking to her plants like she did every afternoon. "Look what I brought you," he said, placing the new orchid on the sill. She touched its leaves gently. "It's beautiful." He remembered, she said after a moment, not looking at him but knowing. "Yeah," he said. He did. That night they had tea together, jasmine green steaming in their favorite mugs. She told him about her day. He told her about the support group. They didn't solve the future. They didn't erase the fear. But they sat together, present, connected, in a way they hadn't in years. Later, as he helped her into bed, she took his hand and said, "You're a good son." He kissed her forehead. "And you're a good mom." Down the hall in his own room, he opened the pamphlet from the community center and wrote a note on the back. "Start small. Show up. Be kind." He taped it to his mirror. Outside, the city hummed with its usual noise, cars, sirens, distant music. But inside that small apartment, there was something quieter, stronger, the sound of two people choosing love again and again. Even when it's hard and somewhere across town, a man closed his bookstore for the night, turned off the lights, and walked home under a sky full of stars, content not because he'd changed the world, but because he'd helped two people remember what mattered most. Months passed. The seasons turned. The rain gave way to warm spring days, then long summer afternoons thick with the scent of blooming jasmine. In a modest apartment on the edge of the city, life settled into a new rhythm. Not perfect, not easy, but kinder. The whiteboard by the front door still held its daily message. Some days it read, "Today is Tuesday. You watered the orchids." Other days just, "You are loved." The sun made sure of it. He'd stopped seeing the notes as chores and started seeing them as quiet promises, reminders that showing up matters, even in the smallest ways. His mother still forgot things. She still mixed up the days. But now when she asked, "Did I take my medicine?" he didn't sigh. He'd walk over, open the pill organizer and say, "Let's check together." And she'd smile, not because she remembered, but because she felt seen. The orchids thrived. Not all at once and not without setbacks. Some leaves yellowed, one pot got too much sun, but slowly, steadily they bloomed. Purple, white, soft pink. She talked to them every morning, just like she always had. And now her son sometimes joined her, sipping his coffee while she whispered encouragement to a stubborn bud. He kept going to the support group. Not every week, but often enough to stay connected. He even started sharing more about his guilt, his fear of failing, the nights he cried in the shower so she wouldn't hear. Others nodded. No one offered fixes. They just said, "Me too," and that was enough. One Saturday morning, he helped her get ready for the senior center's weekly gathering. She wore her favorite lavender blouse and a string of pearls she'd owned since she was young. As he tied her scarf, gently, carefully, she said, "You've changed." He paused. "Have I? You used to look at me like I was a problem to solve," she said softly. "Now you look at me like I'm still your mom." He swallowed hard. "Because you are." At the center, she sat with a circle of friends playing cards and laughing over stories from their youth. He stayed for a while, then slipped out to run errands. When he came back an hour later, he found her showing a new woman how to care for an orchid cutting she'd brought from home. "She's a natural," the center's coordinator said, smiling. "Your mom tells everyone about that day on the bus. Says a stranger reminded her that kindness still exists." He didn't correct her.
He didn't say it was him who needed reminding.
He just nodded and said, "Yeah, it does." Back home that evening, they sat on the balcony as the sun dipped below the rooftops. The city lights flickered on one by one like stars waking up. She held her tea in both hands, steam curling around her face. "You know," she said after a quiet stretch, "I used to worry you'd resent me, for getting older, for needing help." He looked at her, surprised. "Never. But you were so angry," she said gently. "I heard it in your voice. I felt it in your silence." "I was angry at the situation," he said. "Not at you. I just didn't know how to carry it all." "And now?" she asked. "Now I know I don't have to carry it alone." He reached over and took her hand. "And neither do you," she squeezed back. "Good." They sat like that for a long time, no words needed, just presence. The kind of quiet that only comes when two people have weathered a storm and found calm on the other side. Meanwhile, life moved on in the wider world. The bus still ran its route down 7th Street. The same driver still greeted passengers with a nod. And sometimes, when an elderly rider struggled with their bags, someone would stand up without being asked. A teenager would offer a seat. A stranger would say, "Let me help." No one knew why the kindness had started flowing more freely on that line. But those who'd been on the bus that rainy day understood. They carried it with them, not as a story to tell, but as a way to live. The man in the hoodie never returned to the bus. He kept running his small bookstore, recommending novels to regulars, leaving handwritten notes in the window. One read, "Listen more than you speak." Another, "Hold the door. Hold space. Hold hope." People stopped to read them. Some took photos. Most just walked away a little softer. He never sought credit. He didn't need it. He knew the real magic wasn't in the moment he stepped in. It was in what happened after. The son who started listening. The mother who felt safe again. The ripple that kept moving long after he'd stepped out of the frame. One afternoon, months later, the son walked past the bookstore again. It was closed for renovations, a sign taped to the door. "Back soon. Keep reading. Keep caring." He stood there for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photo, him and his mother on the balcony, both smiling, an orchid blooming bright between them. On the back he'd written, "Thank you for seeing us." He slipped it under the door and walked away. Weeks turned into months. The support group added a new member, a younger man just starting his own journey of caring for his father. The son recognized the look in his eyes, the exhaustion, the guilt, the love tangled up with fear. So he stayed after the meeting and said, "Want to grab coffee? I've been where you are." And just like that, the circle widened. At home, his mother began writing short notes again, little slips of paper tucked into his lunchbox, his coat pocket, his book. "Proud of you. You make good tea. Don't forget to rest." He kept everyone in a shoebox by his bed. One evening, as they watered the orchids together, she said, "Do you ever wonder what happened to that man?" He thought for a moment. "I think he's exactly where he needs to be. Helping someone else remember what matters." She nodded. "That's enough, isn't it?" "It is," he said. "Time didn't stop. Aging didn't reverse. Hard days still came. But now they faced them differently, not as enemies, but as companions walking the same path hand in hand. And in the quiet moments, when the kettle whistled, when the orchids bloomed, when laughter filled the kitchen, they remembered. Not just the bus, not just the stranger, but the choice they made afterward. To be kind, even when it's hard. To listen, even when you're tired. To love not perfectly, but fully. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. And sometimes that's everything. You asked for a 5-part story, and the outline was completed as promised. Part 5 was the final chapter, bringing the journey of the mother, her son, and the quiet stranger to a natural, heartfelt close. That said, if you'd like to extend the story into an end Part 6, as a bonus, perhaps exploring how this moment of kindness echoes further into the community, or how the son pays it forward in a new way, I'd be happy to write it for you under the same guidelines. Simple language. Human-centered, warm, and policy-safe, just let me know. For now, the story stands complete in 5 parts as originally requested.